Hello there, and again, I don't know when I'm going to stop saying it, but it's a Women's Day. Now we head into SMB across borders, where we cross the borders, starting from our neighbors, looking out for what is happening in their business world, and not only our immediate neighbors, but also across the entire globe. Now let us kickstart it with the immediate neighbors. Kenya, this is the overall actually for African countries, where African airlines are struggling to recover in the near term. Now, African airlines face up a difficult comeback as projections point on a very slow recovery pace in the international traffic. The passenger traffic is projected to be remaining and also subdued to the near term compared to the slow progress in the vaccination against COVID-19 and the overall impact for the crisis on development countries. Now, the International Air Transport Association now predicted the passenger number within the continent that will be recovering over a shallow grant, achieving a 76% of 2019 level this year and 80% of next year, around 93% in 2024, before surging around 101% around 2025, a year later than the global industry average. Also, the International Air Transport Association highlighted on and asked governments to lift on all the barriers to limit, including quarantine, including testing for passengers that were fully vaccinated, and to replace the PCR tests with the pre-departure antigen testing for the non-vaccinated travelers to ease the movement around the airports. But the industries are lobbying also, industry lobbies would want to travel bans to be removed, as well as fasting, easing the movement on restrictions for general acceptance with what is happening on the centers of the other borders. The biggest and the most immediate drivers for passenger numbers will be also indicating that the governments have to be replacing fortunates, allowing their people to thrive, especially as they look forward to the disruptions from the Ukraine-Russia conflicts. Yes, but now we move forward. Moving on, you're seeing how the African airlines are now going to be struggling with the different distractions that are arising. Also, questions arising, concerns from the Russia-Ukraine. Most of the African countries like Nigeria are experiencing travelers coming back, are experiencing maybe ports on crossing borders through the flights around there. We have seen that as well happening with Ethiopian Airlines. But now what is happening in Kenya? Kenya is rising debt ceiling and also some years on borrowing binge. Now Kenyans lawmakers are pushing for a change in legislation to accommodate around 4 trillion Kenyan shillings, that is around 35.39 billion US dollars, now a debt to fund a rising budget deficit, and also warnings that the country is leading or heading into a very great debt difficulties. Kenya's National Treasury is considering also an increase of financing around 846 billion shillings, that's around 7.48 billion US dollars deficit, hitting around 3.2 trillion spending over the plan that was earlier on highlighted for the 2022-2023 financial year. But members of parliament there are now pushing for a law to change the increased state's borrowing limit for around 13 trillion Kenyan shillings from 9 trillion Kenyan shillings, and that's around 49.64 billion US dollars. The second increment is less than 3 years. Even the public debt hitting around 8.0 trillion Kenyan shillings, that's around 70.97 billion US dollars in December 2021. But when you look at the two political informations around parliament there, The Azamio MPs earlier on this week successfully pushed on the amendment to amend the budget policy statement directing the Treasury amending the Public Finance Management Law to help around there. They also overturned a Budget Appreciations Committee report and held on imposing a 400 billion Kenyan shillings cap on debt to avoid breaching of around 9 trillion shillings. That's around 79.64 billion around there. But what is the weakening indicators for Kenya as well as it hits the debt compared to Tanzania around there? In 2019, you will see that Kenya breached on the East Africa Community debt ceiling after the members of parliament voted in an increase of around 9 trillion, and that is compromising the government's bid to compiling the region's debt target of around 50%. But also you will realize that the risk is that the country will be continuing to borrow to repair the existing debt and not for development expenditures as highlighted around there. But when you cross to Tanzania, you will also be realizing that there has been a rising concern or chorus against the debt borrowings with the country, highlighting that the stock of the nation's debt amounted around 37.57 billion by the end of January this year, and an increase of around 133.2 billion million in a business perspective. We head into on African continent still, where there is a national interest prevailing as African leaders defend the rights of African trapped in the war zones. Available data is indicating that most African countries source most of their military equipment from Russia and may not want to be a bite finger that feeds them in the ongoing calls to condemn the war. But while African leaders have been vocal, united in condemning discrimination against Africans in humanitarian assistance in Ukraine, they are cautions and condemnation of the aggression by Russia. Now, divisions among African countries were laid bare when the United Nations member countries took a vote on the invasion of Ukraine by Russia during there, where some countries appeared to be avoiding any sides. But the Senegalese president Macky Sall, the chair of the African Union, and also the African Commission chairperson Faki Mahamati, said they were practically disturbed at that moment. But reports are also indicating that some Africans had been turned away from European borders while trying to leave the war wrecked around there. But you will see also this is saving Kenya. East African states have stayed away from the commenting on Russia's invasion to Ukraine. However, when you look at the country here in Uganda, you will realize that there has been no official statement made to dismiss the commentary on that particular Russia-Ukraine. It remains still a personal appeal. But experts say behaviors that manifest are yet to be disrupting businesses for the African continents as well as other borders across Ukraine, for example, Kivu, and as well as other Moscow-oriented countries. The manifesto on the UN General Assembly, while on the motion was tabled as an emergency meeting to condemn the aggression by Russia. But conclusively here, when you look at Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, and Rwanda are among the 114 nations that voted yes. But what does it mean for such countries when it comes to later on stages of decision making that earlier on will be met? Because I mean, the war zone, or this war is not going to be continuous, maybe even for 100 years. No, it won't continue for more than, I think, even 20 years. I'm just highlighting or anticipating because I don't think it is going to take that long there. But reports still show that Africans are singled out for unacceptable dysmere treatment that would be shockingly experiencing a lot of racist breaching of the international law. The two leaders actually had a joint on the February 28th on this particular matter. And you will also agree that with this Ukraine-Russia conflictions, there is also a race discrimination arising among Africans living around there, especially when it comes to crossing the borders, going back to maybe the continents, crossing, going back to rescue areas, finding refuge here and there. You find priority is not much given to Africans. But when we come back to African continents, they're now highlighting how the war is going to leave at least a bridge between the African countries. Not only that, but even in the East African countries, there is now distance according to the experts and how leaders are reacting on the Russia-Ukraine. There has been a slight division that is happening among African leaders. Why? Simply because they are not being at par, they are not agreeing or disagreeing at the same point or at the same pace with what is going to be happening for Russia and Ukraine. They are not making decisions that are obviously the same. So with different opinions, that means, for example, a case in point where Rwanda voted yes, but a country like Uganda did not, throw in a comment, or it voted neutral and it remained silent. Countries like Somalia and Somalia here that voted a yes. So you realize the leaders, for example, in Somalia, if they have got ties or allies around, for example, Tanzania, a country like Tanzania, that still remains silent at some point. So there is not going to be trade agreements ongoing very perfectly, because there is going to be an influence of a Russia decision. There is going to be an influence of maybe a Ukraine decision around there. But all in all, we're here to roll and keeping it up there to keep our hopes ongoing and our faith that everything is going to go on well. And we still grieve and, of course, give our hopes to the people in Ukraine that are losing lives, and making sure that everyone trying to find refuge finds it as we pray. But moving further, what is happening in Nigeria? Nigeria's economy is now topping up growth forecasts. Now Nigeria's economy is growing faster than the forecast by the central bank and the government last year's, after the expansion in the agriculture, trade, industries, and in the fourth quarter, they are seeing an offset for the sharp drop in the oil production. Now, domestic product expanded around 3.4% last year after contracting 1.92% in 2020. But Statistician General Simon Harry told up the journalists around Djibouti, around Abuja, that the financial ministry is as well estimated to be around 2.5% at the central bank's projection for around 3.1% growth. Now, the full year number was lifted by a better than expected growth of around 3.98% in the 3 months through December from a year earlier, around there. And when you look at this, you will compare it with the 4% in the third quarter of the median estimation of around 12 economies in the Bloomberg survey that was highlighted there for the quarter, showing a 1.4% in the economic regard of Nigeria. But the fourth quarter highlighted and indicates that a steady economic recovery was being, seen as Nigeria extended their growth, highlighting on the economic expanded or economy expand by around 4.73% in the quarter of a year earlier on, with the agricultural producers growing around 3.58% and the services increasing at a 5%. But Thursday data also pointed out a depict from growing importers of that is the non-crude sector, and might be convincing letters or settlers to increase the benchmark interest on March 2022 after the full year number exceeded around the central bank forecast. But also you realize that the governor of Nigeria highlighted that the central bank will only be making adjustments since the economic recovery is a sustainable path. Therefore, oil production fell out on a 1.50 million barrels a day in the fourth quarter from But while crude oil remains a contributor at 5% on the country's GDP, it accounts nearly for foreign exchange earnings, a half of the government revenue in the continent's biggest producer for the commodity. Okay, now. Nigeria here is being highlighted as one of the economies now in Africa that is growing and topping up the forecast as we even head into the post-recovery of COVID-19. You have seen the percentages highlighting, and what more has boosted its economic recovery or its economic growth has been put on the trade industries as well as agriculture. This one is tagged onto the technologies that Nigerians are using, more so on agro producers and how they're doing value addition chain when it comes, or the value additions when it comes to the agricultural sector. There is a number of also trade industries that have arisen or have risen from Nigeria. That is, possibly people had, embarked on a lot of agricultural practices, agricultural activities around Nigeria. And with the COVID pandemic, they realized one thing that could boost them all, or one thing that actually could revamp what was lost, is technology. So the embracement of technology in Nigeria in regards to agriculture, the investment that they have seen, they're reaping out from it. And not only that, they have got a 5% contribution of the oil production in Nigeria that is also trying to contribute towards their GDP or GDP growth around there, from a 1.50 million barrels a day, which has increased onto a 7-1, making it to 1.57 or 1.57 million barrels. I mean, you can see what technology has done, and there is a lesson to learn actually with our country here as we anticipate a 2025 fast drop of our oil production. At least we should learn from countries that are already in productivity or that are already in production, how we're going to be doing it better and making sure everything moves on very well. And lastly, to our SMB reports, we head now on to investments in young farms that have taken a lead as the East African deals on early stage ventures. Now, the early stage venture capital, that is the VC investment, recorded on a very biggest growth in the new deal with the East Africa last year, targeting around the financial, agribusiness, ICT sectors, as well as recent offering on the high growth potentials. And the analysis of the deal also cried out by the investment, that is capital, showing the VC's dealing jumped from 16 in 2020 to 29 last year. Now, the contrasted with the slowdown size is evolving onto the lower stages, privately equity, which fell onto a 3 to 38 development financial institutions, down from 19 to 9 around there. But when you look at the region capabilities and capacities, the region has we are speaking about the East African region that has witnessed a shift towards the stage investment of around 29 VC transactions being recorded, with a total of about 56.28 US dollars in regards to million. That's around 39.7 euros into 39.7 millions in 2020, and the median value chain of expectancy of around 2.30 million US dollars, and that is a capital annual financial review highlighting on how East African trade or East African trade zone has been reacting towards their development. But the fourth foreign-led emergence acquisition activity was dubbed onto the availability of a cheaper cost for capital, including debt in there. But the early stages of the investors, while taking on more risks to cater for their businesses, highlighted to stand on more outsized returns to startups, because when attention is given to startups everywhere, it is reaping greatly as value rises in the due course. But as we conclude on this one, investment in the young firms leading East African deals, you will realize that last year the countries hosted around 76 deals. We're speaking about East African countries, and we talk Uganda, we talk Kenya, we talk Tanzania, we talk Ethiopia, now we talk Rwanda, and among others. There are now 5 now. There are currently 5. You will realize that Ethiopia being the 7th one there, they were hosting a deal of around 76 deals out of a number of 110 in the region. And Uganda topped out to be the 10th, where Tanzania the 8th, Ethiopia at the 7th, and Tanzania at the 9th, around there. But the year corporate financial advisory firm is also highlighting on how Kenya's general elections slated for August is a concern that will be driving the neighboring countries for investment, whether they're going to be selling with them or trading with them or failing. This is self-explanatory, really. As we head into the Kenya's election slated for August this year, you will realize that there is now strategy for different countries laid with Kenya, with Tanzania. You're seeing now Kenya entering agreements with more so many countries in Africa, crossing to Ethiopia now, where they're trading electricity deals. We have seen Kenya now trying to alliance with the DRC Congo to make sure that the mitigations on trade and the exportation activities are crossed over to West Africa. Not only there, but Kenya is well in good terms with Somalia as well. So you realize that a number of activities are ongoing with Kenya's economy as they head further, or as they head into the election. Very well. That is all we had for you for SMB Across Border. I'm Rita Kabanyoro. We're going to be taking a break. We return with the business quote, we return with the business tip, we return with the weather. Wouldn't you want to know how you're going to be motivated, inspired this morning? Keep it Smart 24 TV. We return.